Hello, everyone, and welcome to another fabulous webinar coming straight to you from the SciFest team. As you know, we've been bringing you some exceptional content, touching on various different topics. And today, it's going to be a topic which is very close to my heart. It's something that I actually believe in, and I think you're going to be quite excited too. I would like to introduce our guest speaker. So Sue, if you'd like to switch on your webcam and get your microphone ready. Sue Swain is a qualified nature conservationist, and her work has taken her all the way from the Goldfields Environmental Education Center at Cape Point, all the way down to Addo Elephant Park, to working for water projects in and around Port Elizabeth, and to the Garden Route National Park. Her primary focus has always been on environmental education and social ecology. Sue's deep passion is biomimicry, and hopefully she's going to unpack what biomimicry is all about and why it's so important. She is the founder and the executive director of BioWise, which is a social enterprise that promotes the practice of biomimicry. As a certified biomimicry educator, and apparently you can get certification for this, she is also a biomimicry practitioner. You say biomimicry 5 times in a row. And of course, she has been immersed in this field since 2006. Not only this, but Sue has conceptualized and coordinated the concept design of a biomimicry discovery park for the Garden Route, and has also developed a BioWise model for towns that focus on earth-savvy living. Now, I know that you've got many accolades and you've been involved with many projects, but we will touch on those after you've done your presentation, because I've got lots of questions that I would love to ask you. But I'm going to hand over to you, Sue. You can get your presentation ready. You can, I think you could start sharing your screen. And while Sue is getting all of that ready, just to say that biomimicry is something that has always fascinated me. It's something that I came across a few years ago, and I've always wondered, you know, why do we need biomimicry, and how does it actually lead to sustainability? So I'm quite confident that these are the topics that Sue will be touching on. And if she doesn't, do not worry. I will still grab her on those anyway. All right. So Sue, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Steve. Thanks for that great introduction. Many thanks to the SciFest organizers for granting me this opportunity. I'm incredibly excited to be sharing my passion. And, you know, particularly the topic of how we can use biomimicry to live sustainably, I think is really critically important. And I'm delighted to be able to actually start off with some really, really good news in terms of that. And just seeing this, I'm trying to get this to advance. There we go. I think it's working now. Because the fabulous truth is that a sustainable world already exists, Steve. And the blueprints thriving in this world, we're surrounded by them. And the truth is, we're actually surrounded by genius, consummate architects, designers, scientists, engineers. Plants, animals, and microbes have been around for some 3.8 billion years. And in that time, they have evolved into these consummate engineers who have really learned what it means to thrive on planet Earth. If we take a look at the engineering genius of the kingfisher, kingfisher is exactly that. He catches fish. And he has to do it by flying headlong from air into a denser medium of water without creating so much of a splash. If it was a splash, that would frighten away the fish. And if you look very carefully, he has self-assembled a beak that is so perfectly designed, it allows him to enter the water without so much as creating a ripple, let alone a splash. By the time those wings hit and make something of a splash, he's already speared the fish. How's that for fitting form to function? Another example of the extraordinary genius we're surrounded by is that of the peacock. who creates these brilliant iridescent blues and greens, not through pigmentation, but through simply the way the feathers are layered, and that allows certain light portions of the light spectrum through and reflect others. Structural coloring is, of course, much, much brighter than pigmentation coloring. It's about 4 times brighter, contains no toxicity, and very importantly, it never ever fades. And I think the wonderful irony is that the very same sunlight that causes the pigments in our dyed materials to start to fade over time is the very essence of what creates the color day in and day out for structural coloring. Then we have the architectural genius of termites. I mean, if you consider, we've got an organism here with a brain no bigger than the size of a pinhead, that without architectural designs or plans, without a project manager, is able to construct the equivalent of a high-rise building that is able to maintain a steady 28.4 degrees Celsius temperature, where the outside temperatures are soaring up to 55 degrees Celsius or down to 0 degrees. And it does this by creating a series of tunnels and chambers that it opens and closes in response to the changing conditions. And the reason why they need it at that specific temperature is because they're actually farming the fungus. It's the fungus that they need that enables them to digest the cellulose of the leaves that they eat. Without that fungus, they're not able to digest a single morsel of food. So when it comes to termites, the reality is we're not the first to build, and we're also not the first farmers. And then lastly, we also have the chemical genius of a spider. Literally takes in a fly in one end and produces a miracle material out the other end. We're talking about a material that is ounce for ounce 5 times stronger than steel. If you could make strands no thicker than a pencil, it could catch a jumbo jet in flight. That is how strong and tensile it is. And yet it is simply crafted within the body of the actual spider using ambient pressure, ambient temperature, readily available chemical ingredients, and obviously produces something that is completely non-toxic. In fact, the outcome, the web, is so non-toxic and benign, it even gets eaten by many of the spiders at the end of its useful life. Now you compare that method and strategy to that of our traditional material scientists who call it heat, beat, and treat method, where we use extreme temperature, extreme pressure, toxic solvents to produce products that in the end, and materials that in the end are also highly toxic and not able to be assimilated into the system. And when you consider the differences between that, you realize, this is where the true genius in nature lies. That it has got to grips with doing things in a way that doesn't deplete, harm, pollute, poison, or jeopardize the future of this planet. And this is really something of an introduction to biomimicry, in that biomimicry is essentially a new viewing and valuing of the natural world. It says, well, hang on, maybe we should be considering, regarding nature more, instead of as a warehouse of resources that's just there for us to extract from, perhaps we should rather see it as a library of ingenuity that we could be learning from. And that is the essence of biomimicry. It is essentially learning from and emulating nature's genius to solve our design and sustainability challenges. It does require having a lens, because traditionally we focus on learning about an animal or an organism. We will name it, we'll describe it, we'll describe his eating habits, his reproduction, etc. Whereas when you're looking at biomimicry, you're needing to then transition from learning about to learning from. So here we have an owl who is a night hunter, so surely there must be lessons from this fellow in the art of achieving silent flight, the art of night vision. There's even lessons to be learned about fabric design, being able to unzip a material anywhere along its surface and rezip it, etc. So I think that you might get the distinction there between learning about and learning from. Not that we still need to learn about nature, but it's in knowing about the organism and then deciding, well, what is it that they do and how they do it, and therein lie the lesson for us to take and apply. And apply, we have started doing this. There are some classic examples. We must probably all know about Velcro having been based on the design of the cocklebur seed and how it attaches itself to the fur of an animal. But here we have the Shinkansen bullet train, a high-speed train can travel at 320 kilometers per hour. That problem was, though, that with the rounded nose cone that looks like a bullet, but rounded nose cone pushes air in front of it, which caused a major problem with the train entering and then exiting a tunnel, with the differences in the air densities causing a massive sonic boom. And with the railway line going through mountainous Japan, this was a problem where every 10 minutes there'd be this massive sound explosion. And so they turned to the engineers and said, we've got a problem, please, can you help solve this? And the one engineer happened to be an instinctive biomimic and a birder. And he said, well, you know, what in nature faces these same challenges, differences in densities? And you would have already seen the organism. I wonder if you can guess what it is. It's, of course, the kingfisher, diving through air into water, where that beak shape basically slices through the air. And so what they did is they simply redesigned the front nose cone to match the shape of the kingfisher beak. Not only was sonic boom a thing of the past, but now the train also needed 15% less electricity. It was 10% faster and 10% quieter. So this is rather an exciting and visually appealing example of biomimicry. It is, however, a fairly shallow example of biomimicry, but it's where we use it to solve some of our design challenges. And in this case, we take the actual challenge to biology and say, can you help us? Another classic example is this of the Eastgate building in Harare. Mick Pierce, a Zimbabwean architect, was approached to design the latest high-rise structure in Harare, which was to be this Eastgate Centre, a combination of a shopping mall and office blocks, etc. Mick was absolutely fascinated by termites and was very excited about the project, and realized that there would be many lessons that he could apply from how the termites manage temperature regulation into how they would need to manage it as well. And basically, he applied the same kind of design principles, tapped into the same kind of physical forces that exist, to produce a building that uses 90% less energy than any other building of comparable size. Now, this is really getting exciting. This is where we're starting to solve design challenges, sustainability challenges, our energy challenges in particular. A lot of the time, I think we get caught up in thinking, how much more can we produce? If we have solar farms and wind farms, we can produce that much more energy. Whereas the real question we should be asking ourselves, if we want to be truly sustainable, is not how much more we can produce, but how much less we can use. And tapping into natural ventilation and all of that enables us to do that. And this is one of my favorite examples of biomimicry, where we start to understand that every organism actually lives within a system and is designed to be part of that system, an integral part of that system. And it was Arnold Glass who realized that their particular product was creating a problem. They produce glass planes for windows. Glass buildings are becoming more and more popular because they allow for natural lighting, which of course reduces energy needs, electricity needs. So that on the one side is pretty good, but on the other side, you can actually see in this picture the amount of reflection happening. And the consequence of that is that more than 1 billion birds are killed globally around every year from flying into glass windows. And so they said to themselves, well, but hang on a second, we're not the first to build obstructions. And this is also another organism that we've seen, because what is a spider web if not an obstruction within a forest? And it's certainly not in the interest of the spider to have a big bird fly through its web. Web is designed to catch small insects. That's what it's wanting it to do. And so they studied it a bit further, and they found out that many species of spiders actually weave ultraviolet strands into their webs, because birds see with ultraviolet vision. They pick up that there's an obstruction and they fly around. Arnold Glass simply followed the same kind of principles. They have incorporated UV reflective strands into their glass windows, because we don't see with UV vision, it's invisible to us, but to birds, they pick up on the obstruction. And in the test that they've undertaken, they've achieved up to a 96% reduction in bird fatalities. So that's a wonderful example of learning from nature to actually help nature. And this is where it also starts to get really exciting when we start to think about designing within a system and how important that is. It's nature's systems, which are the truly extraordinary in the level of sustainability that they exhibit. Nature systems are basically ecosystems like forests, savanna, coral reefs, you name it. If we look at a forest, like this one, the image you see in front of you, you see a whole host of species, different trees, shrubs, creepers, ground covers, ferns, you name it. And of course, supporting a huge diversity of organisms, from amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, worms, insects, fungus, you name it. And in Janine Benyus's words, Janine Benyus wrote the book and coined the phrase of biomimicry. She's the biomimicry guru. It's as if these organisms, they have self-organized into this integrated community of organisms that have a common purpose. And that purpose is to maintain their presence in one place, make the most of what is available, and to thrive over the long haul. And surely that's exactly what we're also striving for. And what's important to note, though, which I failed to mention, is that all these systems, be it forests, be it savanna, etc., they are bound by certain soil conditions or certain climatic conditions. So they're effectively a finite-sized system. And yet within that, there is a sharing of territory and a sharing of resources that is truly astounding. When you think about it, if you look closely, you'll actually understand that a forest is functioning very similarly to a town. I mean, let's look at some of the functions that are happening. I mean, you've got construction and communication. You've got wining and dining and the associated food production. You've certainly got marketing and advertising. You've got courier services. And you very definitely have to have also the management of resources such as water and waste. But what's really important is how these organisms are doing it. They're basically doing it in such a way that there is no wasting. There's no depleting of the system. There's no tapping into fossil fuels and non-renewable resources. The result of that means that there's no polluting and there's no poisoning of the system. And from a human perspective, really importantly, there is also no unemployment in a forest. Every organism is basically meeting its own needs while contributing to meeting the needs of the system that they are part of. I mean, isn't that simply beautiful? They're taking care of the place that takes care of them and meeting their own needs in the same process. How they're doing it is also what's so important. They're working together, they're collaborating, sharing, to actually help regulate the temperature. They're helping to build soil, they're helping to cycle nutrients, clean air and water. They're contributing to cycles, contributing to water cycles, nutrient cycles. They're helping to balance carbon. Imagine if this was describing our communities, our cities, our towns. You've got to admit that what that describes is an economy beyond compare. And in biomimicry terms, it's the ethos that really attracted me, I think, mostly to biomimicry. And it's the simple truth that life creates conditions conducive to life. That is the simple essence of what every organism out there is doing, helping to create the conditions in which all life can thrive, to create the conditions that enhance and nourish life. Isn't that simply beautiful? So what we essentially have is a naturally regenerative system. And that is the secret to sustainability. I've always had a little bit of a problem with the word sustainable, because if I said to you, you know, what's your relationship like with your wife or your husband or whatever, and you said to me it was sustainable, I'd say, oh, shame, I'm sorry to hear, it doesn't sound too good. I'd rather hear that it's thriving and it's wonderful and exciting. And I think that's what biomimicry offers us. That's what nature shows us is possible, that we can be regenerating, we can be creating anew. Every day we can be contributing positively. You know what, when you look at our systems and you compare with what we're doing, you'd kind of be forgiven thinking, are we actually living on the same planet? Because how can you have two such vastly different approaches? How on earth has that happened? And that's a key question, is that how on earth? And we need to be asking the questions, you know, if we're part of life on earth, which we are, how is it that we're the only ones tapping into fossil fuel? If you look at nature systems, why are they only tapping into a safe subset of chemicals? If there are 117 elements in the chemical periodic table, why on earth can't we use all 117 of them? Why are they only using a safe subset? Why does nature value what is readily and abundantly available? I mean, we do the exact opposite. We value that which is highly inaccessible and really very, very scarce. Why is there no waste? Why? Waste is just so part of and parcel of everything. Nature, obviously there is waste in nature, and yes, there is no wasting. How does that happen? Why is there so much diversity and redundancy? You look at, we follow monocultures. That's the way to go. That's the way we will feed the world. Fields and fields of monoculture. Exact opposite of how food is grown in a forest. And why have we bought into the narrative of cutthroat competition when actually collaboration and generosity is what we see in nature? And asking those questions and wondering, just, you know, how do we live on the same planet? It does seem to me that we've lost sight of the fact that this is our home. That's one of a kind. I mean, do we really get that this is the only planet in the entire universe that is known to sustain life? An extraordinary set of conditions came together to make that possible, for life to emerge and thrive. We certainly don't treat it like our home. And we certainly don't seem to have got to grips with is the Earth's unique operating conditions. The fact that it is powered by the sun, it is gravity-based, that life on Earth is water-based, that there are a host of chemical elements available, and that there are irrefutable physical laws of physics that guide the functioning. It's also a planet that is subject to limits and boundaries. It is a closed system planet, effectively. There are no direct imports and no exports. Can't even say we really import sunlight. We receive sunlight and we export a tiny bit of heat. That's it. And it's also finite sized. It's not increasing in size, not to any significant extent. I think it was David Attenborough who said that if you think infinite growth on a finite sized planet is possible, you're either mad or an economist. And that's something we need to bear in mind. The other thing about this planet and its operating condition is that it is subject to constant change. It's a dynamic planet. No 2 days are ever the same. No 2 moments are ever the same. Interestingly enough, some of those changes are also cyclical, like the day-night cycle, the lunar cycles, the seasons. We have water cycles, we have nutrient cycles, we have carbon cycles. There are these cyclical processes. And lastly, it is also a deeply interconnected planet. Now, those operating conditions result in certain ecological realities. If you're on a closed system planet where there are no imports and exports, the reality is what we have is what we've got, and there is no throwaway. You're eventually going to drown in your waste if all you're doing is throwing it away. Change is the only constant. Everything is connected to everything else. For every action, there is a reaction. and there is no free lunch. And what is to me absolutely extraordinary is how nature has taken those limits and boundaries and those ecological realities, rather than bemoaning them, and instead of trying to break through the limits and boundaries, they have respected and worked both within and with those limits and boundaries, turning them into limitless opportunities of finding ways to thrive. And again, if that is the simple lesson that we can take, we'd be absolutely remarkable what we could achieve. And for this reason, I think this is where the deepening biomimicry approach is important, where it's no longer just regarding nature as our model, but also very much as our mentor and our measure, the standard by which we measure what we're doing. And the fact is that there are these deep patterns, these generic patterns that are adopted by virtually all species that we need to be emulating. And I'd like us to take a look at some of these deep patterns. We've already touched on the one. I wonder if you can work this one out. We've got the peacock with its structural layering. We've got a gecko, and that's the underside of the gecko's foot, how it helps to adhere. Shark skin, that's what shark skin looks like under a microscope. And that's what a lotus leaf looks like under a microscope. And the deep pattern, the deep approach, the deep strategy is nature uses structure to achieve functionality. It uses physics first and foremost rather than chemistry. And if you consider, and it does it at the nano level, nature has been exploiting the nano technology for, literally millions of years. For us, it's only about a couple of decades old. So the opportunities are enormous. And with using structure to achieve functionality, obviously it has huge implications in terms of energy savings as well as the production of waste. I think that's a critically important one. The other one pattern that we see emerging is that nature is resource and energy efficient. In this case, it has learned to tap into freely available physical forces. Shark taps into the power of the vortex. The gecko taps into van der Waals forces. Zebras and termites tap into the fact that hot air rises, cold air sinks, and dark colors absorb heat and light colors reflect heat, for instance. These irrefutable physical laws that we could be tapping into, these freely available physical forces. Another means of being resourceful is also what's happening here. We spoke about the spider producing a miracle material out of the other end, opposite to its mouth, but here you'll see that the spider is actually eating the web. And it does that because spider silk is quite expensive to produce, and it's quite an expensive protein energy-wise. So here they eat it, are able to reabsorb the silk and use a lot less energy to actually produce more silk the next day. Same thing with, look at the leaves. If you notice, the leaves have actually turned down on the tree. Chlorophyll is a very valuable material, so they reabsorb the chlorophyll before dropping those leaves. So the lessons there are in our design for recovery and reuse. We mentioned about using life-friendly chemistry and how the spider does it. It also, every organism that uses chemistry is doing it in the same kind of way, in a way that is actually producing its benign chemistry, life-friendly, splashing chemicals together to light their body lantern, producing a resin that is able to withstand wave action, exposure to sunlight and wind action, etc. And the secrets to life-friendly chemistry is basically self-assembly, using water as a solvent, ambient pressure and temperature to create materials that are able to, chemical elements that are able to be reabsorbed, assimilated back into the system. And what's so important is to realize that nature has always only ever used a safe subset of the chemical elements that are available. As I mentioned, there are 117 elements. Nature has basically used 16 of those and a further trace element of 10. It is our species that has come along and with extreme temperature and extreme pressure forced chemicals into combinations that the Earth has not actually seen in 3.8 billion years. and that's why it can't be absorbed, assimilated, or broken down. If you look at our factories, our ways of manufacturing, is there another way? Well, what's a tree if not the world's best example of a factory and regenerative manufacture? That is earth savvy on the one side, where it's solar powered, it uses locally available abundant resources, ambient pressure and temperature, electricity, free water distribution. It's also life enhancing on the other side. Imagine our factories were to be cleaning air and water, supporting biodiversity, planting and feeding the rain, absorbing carbon, etc. So the question is, can we actually be creating factories that function like a tree? And can we be creating towns and cities that function like a forest? And indeed, why should we? Well, let's have a look a little bit closer. I mean, let's just look at how a forest manages waste. You have a dead branch that falls to the floor. In come your first level feeders, your centipedes and your wood borers, capable of breaking down the hard outer pieces of bark, exposing the softer pieces so that your wood lice and your fungus can now get in and break it down further, until ultimately it goes through the bodies of earthworms to produce the nutrients that can be taken up by the tree to effectively grow another branch. Lessons to be learned from this is that waste is a resource. Waste equals food in nature. Critically important, something we just haven't got to, that every thing happens on a localized and decentralized basis. Decentralized distributed networks and systems are the way to go. You can't imagine a forest stockpiling its recycling and then sending it to Cape Town for actual recycling. That could never work. It happens on that localized, decentralized basis. There's a thing of it's always about giving back, returning, replacing that which you have used. And don't you just love the cooperation and the working together? It's not, the centipede could come in and devour the entire thing, but it doesn't, because diversity is actually nature's insurance policy. If the essence of waste management is cycling of nutrients, and if you've only got one species doing that and something happens on this dynamic planet that takes out all centipedes, and you had based your entire waste management and cycling of nutrients only on the existence of that single species, you'd be in the dwayne. Nature is diversity is nature's insurance policy, and functional redundancy also. What's interesting is also that there is this upcycling and this cascading of nutrients and energy. If you consider, when the centipede eats it, the bark becomes part of the body of the centipede that gets eaten by a bird, it becomes part of the body of the bird. So there's actually this upcycling, and when they poop, there's the downcycling. So it's wonderful cascading of nutrients and energy that is happening all the time. And lastly, we take a look at how a forest manages water, critical life-giving water. I've always found it fascinating that the fact that, our planet, the surface of a planet, 70% of it consists of water, and yet 97% of that is salty. Why, when life requires fresh water, would 97% of the water that we have be salty? Perhaps it is a natural limit and boundary, a limit to growth that is actually needs to be respected. But anyway, if you look at a system like trees, you're literally rooted to the spot. Are you seriously going to design yourself to rush the stormwater away as quickly as possible? Or are you designed to do something completely different? If you look at the trees and you look at the different layers of trees, the tall trees, the shorter trees, the shrubs, the bushes, this entire system is designed to slow, spread, and sink the rain. That's what we call planting the rain, literally planting the rain into the ground. The reason for this, sorry, gone the wrong way, is basically it's how can we store the rain? We need it to be there. We need to mitigate against droughts, against times when there isn't rain. How do we ensure that there's still water around for us? How do we prevent erosion? But what's really interesting to note is that a system like this, it is estimated that about 50% of the rain that falls is infiltrated into the ground. but 45% is actually then lost to evapotranspiration. And I use that word lost very loosely, as because actually what is happening there is this generosity in nature, because that is what helps to seed rain. Rain can only fall if water has evaporated. And so that 45% evapotranspiration is ensuring that rain will fall again at another time. And so that leaves only 5% actual runoff. But that's a sharing of the rain. That's water, though, that has then filtered and has gone through a whole lot of filters. It filters slowly down into the rivers, taking fulvic acid with it, which readily combines with the iron on the land. Land is iron rich, the oceans are iron poor. So you have iron-rich waters that can make their way to the oceans that boost phytoplankton growth, which is why you have this beautiful Japanese expression that says, if you want to catch a fish, plant a tree. So these are the kind of things. Now you compare that to our urban systems and how we've designed them to rush stormwater away as quickly as possible. It is estimated that the city of Cape Town, which was at nearly day zero a couple of years ago or last year, it's estimated that the city receives 4 times its annual consumption needs as rain on the city, on the actual urban footprint. And yet we consider ourselves that there was this lack of water. It is that we have failed to design our cities to slow spread and sink that rain, to plant the rain and to seed it. And ultimately, what we're looking at there is it's a system that is contributing to the wellness of the whole planet and the system itself. Restorative, it's supportive of each other, and it's collaborative. They're all working together to ensure that that happens. And this is really what the secret is to living sustainably: working with, learning from, and consciously emulating nature's genius and time-tested, earth-savvy wisdom. Biomimicry does require that we just rethink a couple of things, that we rethink our relationship with the rest of life on Earth. For some reason, we consider ourselves separate from, greater than. We need to shift from the egocentric to what is called the ecocentric, where we recognize that we're actually a magnificent part of the system, not better than, greater than, but needing to become an equally contributing player. It also requires us to reconsider our role on Earth. We need to move from consumers to contributors, and to recognize that there are no passengers on spaceship Earth. We are all crew. And I think this is what excites me the most for our species. Imagine that we can become this welcome, contributing keystone species that is integral to the health of the planet. And I'd just like to end off with this little thing about these 2 planets that were hanging out in space. And one said to the other, "Oh, gosh, you're not looking very well." He said, "Oh no, I'm burning up, I've got fever, I'm coughing." He said, "Oh, have you got COVID-19? He said, "No, actually, I've got Homo sapiens." And the other one said, "Oh, well, don't worry, I used to have that, it didn't last long." So that's it really. I believe we have the opportunity to become a welcome species that belongs and that purposefully contributes, that is there to help create conditions conducive to life. We have the model, we have the blueprint. That's what's exciting. Thank you very much.
Right, let's just see. Ryan, are we able to get the video back on?
Sure, hold on a sec.
There we go. My video is on, and Sue, is your video on?
It's there we go.
Excellent. Okay, so first let me commend you, because I think that I've seen many presentations on biomimicry, and you succinctly stated and very clearly what the objectives are, and you cited perfect examples of the magnificence of biomimicry and the majesty of nature, and how, for lack of a better word, how doff we are as humans for ignoring that, because I mean, we've completely overlooked something that has been around way longer than we have, and we've taken the egocentric approach and think that we can just assert ourselves within this environment to our own detriment. We're chopping off our nose to spite our own faces. So before I get into questions, I know that we had one comment that came through, and that was from Helen. Helen said, this is not a comment, but this is the most exciting stuff I've heard in ages. And my response to Helen was, tell me about it. This is just, it really is a fascinating topic. But before we get on to the juicy bits, I want to know, every superhero has an origin story. And of course, you must have got into biomimicry through some sort of path. What was the trajectory that you followed to get into this discipline in science?
Well, thanks for that, Steve. Yeah, I think really what biomimicry, they talk about the 3 seeds of biomimicry being reconnect, emulate, and ethos. And I think a lot of us, the pathway starts with that reconnect with nature. So just as a family, we were really brought up with a lot of animals in the home. I developed just a natural affinity towards animals. And I was really interesting. I studied nature conservation and then opted to go into more the environmental education side of things. And it was very shortly after I started actually needing to teach about nature and things like photosynthesis, when I realized, my word, I had learned about these things. I could quote photosynthesis backward, but it didn't actually mean anything to me because it hadn't been taught in that kind of way. And it suddenly dawned on me, but also that there are so many things we should be learning from nature. And at that stage, I'd never heard of biomimicry. I started thinking of this discovery path that was about reconnecting with nature and learning from nature in about 1998. And then I first heard of biomimicry in 2006. And so, yeah, I think it was just something that inherently came to me. But I think what's important to understand is that biomimicry actually is a reawakening. We're genetically wired to get this because we are part of this planet. I love how Janine Benyus says our bodies are perfectly adapted to this planet. It's just our behavior that's maladapted. And that's really what is both exciting, because there are so many lessons we could be learning just from our human body to understand that we are so much part and parcel of this planet. So when I read the book in 2006, I then got so excited because I thought, okay, my daft thinking, I'm not alone in this. There's something real happening out there. And in 2009, Biomimicry South Africa and the Biomimicry Institute came out, brought Janine Benyus out, and she actually held a 10-day workshop, which I attended, which was just phenomenal. And just from there, it really took off. And I've been really immersed in it since then.
Wow. Well, all I can say is that we've now opened up a can of worms, because now the questions are starting to come through. We'll start with Mike Bruton's question. Mike wants to know, do you agree that the essential issue is that we are the first species to lose its ecological niche?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that in itself is what is so exciting, is that it is about us finding our ecological niche again. And I think what is important, though, is that our species, potential for our species is astronomical, because of our intelligence, our ability to, develop technologies and things like that. We aren't going to be limited to a single niche. A dung beetle, bless its heart, is a dung beetle. It's there to basically recycle the nutrients in dung. And it does it extraordinarily well. And there are about 10 different lessons we can learn from the dung beetle. its very specific niche. We will be able to occupy any number of niches, but we need to be occupying those niches with the same principles that are applied, those deep patterns that are applied by nature. I agree 100% with Mike. We have lost that, and I think we are a species lost. We don't have a purpose. We get up in the morning. Imagine now you could get up and you know you're positively contributing to the wellness of the system that you're immediately part of and to the wellness of the planet at whole overall. I think if we can have that, maybe we wouldn't be so obsessed with finding life on other planets when we realize we share this planet with 30 to 100 million different species that are just waiting to be heard.
Absolutely. Well, okay, so let me get into Robin's question, and I'm hoping I'm understanding it correctly. It says there is waste in a natural system. The waste is the countless species that have failed to adapt over time to changing conditions in evolutionary process. Can we integrate into natural systems without a wasteful trial and error process?
Yeah, look, plenty of species have gone extinct. So the ones that have thrived are the ones that have adapted and evolved. I wouldn't call it wasteful. I think that's all part of the evolutionary lessons, because often nature has actually incorporated mistakes. That's a key strategy in terms of one of the deep principles. If you're going to adapt and evolve, it's about incorporating mistakes. Elephants would never have come around if there wasn't a genetic variation that developed wrinkled skin, which enabled them to grow to the size that they are because you had more surface area now in which to give off heat, etc. So, yeah, I think it's maybe just rethinking the evolutionary processes, and even when things go extinct, that's not necessarily wasteful. There are always lessons that have been learned and incorporated, and you start off on one path and you may retract and then go forward, but you would have taken lessons with you on that. There's an extraordinary example of slime mold, which is basically a unicellular organism that under certain conditions start to act as a multicellular organism when suddenly there's a whole lot of nutrients available. Basically what happens is they start multiplying, they send out tendrils looking for food, and if the one tendril shoots out and it doesn't find anything, it actually retracts, but it leaves a scent that says, don't bother to go down that route, I've already been there. So yeah, I think that's the kind of thing. And with regards to waste in a system, yeah, there are byproducts, but it's how you regard that. As I said, waste in nature is food for something else. So there is no such thing as true waste, because it is all turned into a resource. And I think with the evolutionary processes, the loss of the species is still turned into lessons learned that get incorporated to help new species adapt and evolve even better. It's constantly changing. The whole, it does change, as we know.
Well, I mean,
that answered the question.
It did. Well, I certainly got that. I think that the one distinction that I've always noticed between nature and us as human beings is the difference between needs and wants. In nature, they take what they need, but as humans, we take what we want. And by nature, the human nature I'm talking about, we have this inbuilt mechanism called greed, and also a lack of empathy, and that tends to mean that we don't really care about the pollution of plastic in the ocean, because it's not our actual ocean, it belongs to someone else, so it's their problem, not ours. So we tend to switch off from the role that so every decision that we make impacts the system, and because some of those impacts are so far away from us, we tend to switch off and ignore them because they don't impact us personally. When it does impact us, all of a sudden we're like, oh, we should definitely do something about it. So how do we wake people up and teach them? I mean, we've got, for example, certain political systems. I won't mention any names, but there's certain countries that rhyme with USA. And for example, they have completely disregarded science and the impact that the environment, the change in the environment is having on our ecosystems. And as you mentioned, you gave a wonderful example of the forest where you had rain planters and rain seeds. And once you start messing with ambient temperature, that system starts changing dramatically, and that has an impact on the forest environment. So when we start going up to levels of government and they poo-poo the whole idea that there is this actual thing going on, and that it's not really important, and we still need to use fossil fuels, how do we penetrate the minds of government and public opinion when fake news and lack of science seems to become quite popular?
Yeah, I mean, that is a challenge. You know, one of the reasons they say why we find ourselves where we are is that we are an extraordinarily young species. And to be honest, we're kind of acting like toddlers. And I think some of us are more toddler-like than others. And it is going to require political will to bring about change. But I also think that business is going to start becoming a real driving force, hopefully in the right way. When I say about toddlers and that, I mean, if you look at the geological timescale of the planet being 4.5, 4.6 billion years, and we were to condense that into a single calendar year, and we were standing at midnight of that calendar year, December the 31st, we only emerged about 20 minutes ago. And the scientific revolution, the industrial revolution, was all of 60 seconds ago. So it's a very short timescale in which we have wreaked havoc that we have. But I believe that we're starting to actually grow up now. We're starting to realize, and that yes, while you might have political leaders who are really, you know, highly questionable in what they're doing, there are people in the country, in those same countries, that are doing extraordinary work. And I think it's all going to start needing to come from grassroots level. You'll remember I said about a forest community being self-organized. And they've self-organized themselves into a diverse and integrated community with a common purpose. And it happens, I think it's going to happen community by community, until that becomes the larger voice, the global voice. Definitely greed is a problem. I know I tend to be idealistic in my thinking, greed and want, but I also think that as we start maturing as a species, we'll start to understand that, you know, exactly what it is that actually makes us fulfilled, exactly what is it that brings deep and lasting happiness, and is it just money and stuff, or is it something far more far deeper than that?
Well, I mean, if you think about the media industry, they're the ones who are telling you what you want. So,
Yeah.
so effectively, if we could alter their perspectives, we might find that, you know, if companies said, we're going to market our products, but it's got to have a certain a positive economical impact, or it's got to look at sustainability and that type of thing at its core, it might be interesting if the advertising industry was challenged to hit those high notes. But now Helen wants to know, she said that she really loved the point that we need to learn from nature and not about nature. And I couldn't agree more. I think that is a wonderful posture in terms of how we should be approaching it. She wants to know, and she also mentioned that she just hopes that it's not too late, that, you know, in the process. But she wants to know, do you teach biomimicry in university classes? And if so, where? And if not, at what stage of our educational trajectory do we start embracing biomimicry from a formal point of view?
Biomimicry SA, through Claire Yanish, she is a certified biomimicry professional. So she was amongst the first cohort, but effectively doing a master's in biomimicry. So there is something offered by the Biomimicry Institute and by the University, Arizona State University. But in South Africa, I know Claire has also just recently developed an online course, which is available for, to anyone and everyone who might be wanting it. There are, Biomimicry SA does offer courses by BioWise, my little nonprofit. Yeah, I basically have given presentations. I'm starting at school level. I think we need a multi-pronged attack. I think the younger we can start, the better, but then we need to take them on an evolving journey of understanding throughout their school career as well. But we also need the designers, architects, and engineers literally of today also to understand this. And I think that's where what the Masters in Biomimicry is doing is it's making itself available more to the professionals. So it's a postgrad degree. So if you've got your engineering degree, this is something that you can add to it so you can become a biomimicry-inspired architect or engineer, etc. But, for me, it's also about very much how do we start applying it just in our own homes, in our own lifestyles. It's requiring, it's just those shifts. It's how can I learn from, what am I doing? Am I creating conditions in which all life can thrive? And it can be as little as saying, well, am I supporting biodiversity in my garden? Have I got a bee-friendly, pollinator-friendly garden? You can start with the little steps like that, and then it will start growing on you as well.
Sure. Someone did ask if you were able to post the information that you just mentioned now with Claire and also your organization. So maybe if you just type it in the chat, then we'll post it. Ryan says that he will email the attendees all the information, and hopefully we can post it on the SciFest Facebook page and website where people can actually access that information.
Okay, great.
I mean, we've only got about 1 or 2 more minutes left. And I've still got a few more questions coming in through. Before I get onto the one, I want to throw a spanner in the works and be a little contentious. What about people who say, that's Sue Swain, tree hugging, nature loving, biomimic, more like animal mimic? I mean, it's just this vegan culture trying to take over the world and assert their opinions on us. You know what? I don't like bees. They sting me and I'm allergic. Let's keep them out of the garden. You know what? I don't really care for spiders, because all I know is that when you walk into a spider web, it instantly turns you into a ninja. That's the only benefit that a spider web could possibly have. Why should we listen to you and the rest of your cronies when it comes to biomimicry? What's your response to that?
Well, I do get that quite a bit, but
I think surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me.
My response would really be, how about just asking yourself some different questions? This isn't, certainly these principles and patterns and strategies we're talking about are not someone's just ideas. It's the reality of what is out there and what is happening. What we do with that is really going to be up to us. And it's about being prepared to open yourselves up to thinking differently. I do get that there is fear of some organisms, there's dislike of some organisms. Just because we fear or something and have the power to just destroy and kill, the question is, well, should we? Do we start looking deeper? Do we start understanding that biodiversity is actually the key to what drives this planet? And the magnificence of that biodiversity is what makes this planet so special. And that we are but one in a parliament of about 30 million species that actually has a vote. I most probably have, with that answer, a few more people saying, no, she's a bit from cuckoo land.
And I suppose it's one of those things. So I'm going to add to that element. Robin says that,
Yes.
From a religious point of view, certain religions have promised dominion over the animals and nature in general. So now you've got one aspect where, from a religious point of view, those views might be encouraging the current attitudes because we've been promised this according to certain texts. And then, of course, you've got certain governments who are saying, listen, you want to keep the lights on, we're going to have to burn coal. That's just the way it goes. We are not going to go and let all of you go put solar panels on your roof because you know what? That's not the way the government runs. We can't afford to do that. Then we don't get any money, so we can't offer you services. So now I'm afraid that's not going to happen. So there are going to be certain obstacles in your way, particularly from people with a religious belief and perhaps even people from a political point of view. And then just to add to that, Mike wanted to know, do you think that women are better tuned emotionally to living and thinking sustainably? So now we have a gender issue. Do you think that maybe there's a certain gender bias towards this approach from perhaps more focused from women than men? Or do you think that's completely, it's irrelevant?
Okay, well, just responding to the religious comments that were made and about the fact that animals were put into subjection under our feet and that. I think you will find in most religions, though, that there is mention of stewardship, that while they are being, and it's a matter of interpretation in terms of that dominion, is that maybe that we are there to actually care for and actually be stewards of this planet. And so I think there is the potential to also then understand that within that, we can adopt the stewardship role, but to know how to do that well, we might well have to learn from the planetary elders, which are the plants, animals, and microbes. From a political perspective, I do think there's quite a bit happening. You've got Kate Raworth with her donut economics. She's a UK economist. You've got Prince William, who has now just started the Earthshot Prize. You've got David Attenborough. You've got lots of people starting to raise levels of awareness also. And for me, what biomimicry is it's not about going back to the dark ages. It's about embracing technology, but using that technology wisely. And to be honest, if we're going to be pursuing politically economics in which we have economies that are based more on how few people are working, because we're replacing them with robotics and all sorts of things, we're going to have bigger problems on our hands than anything. So yeah, I think political leaders would do well to start embracing the fact that there are new economic models emerging that are based on a far deeper understanding of how this planet works. Mike's comment about women, potentially, but I also know there are some wonderful men out there who are, thinking along the same lines. I think I think it does require maybe being a bit more in touch with one's feminine side, and we have the yin and the yang in all of us, I reckon. So yeah, but I do think we have transitioned into a new age, and that more and more voices are going to start singing from the same hymn book very soon. And I do think it is. We've come through several what do you call them? What's a revolutions? From the agricultural revolution to the scientific, the industrial, the petrochemical, the genetic, and I believe now we're in the natural revolution. And those who don't actually cotton on, they may well become destined to become extinct, as opposed to those who do.
Well, I think on that note, I know that we have run a little bit over. I just want to end off with one comment that came through from Helen. She says, "Thank you so much for all these refreshing insights. I feel hopeful for the first time in ages." And I think that we all echo what Helen is saying. This presentation has been an eye-opener in terms of much of the knowledge that people are not aware of. I think a lot of us were already nodding our heads through every single slide that you gave. And I think it's important as people who are communicating science to support the ideas that it's not just about tree huggers. It really is about sustainability and helping our own ecosystems to survive for generations to come. So on that note, Sue, I would like to thank you so much for your time and your energy and your passion. We really do appreciate it. I know that there's going to be another riveting interview or webinar happening next week at the same time with someone who I was hoping to interview, and that is Rob Greenfield. If you ever do a Google search on Rob Greenfield, he is insane. He is what we call an eco-activist, and he does things in a way that really changes your attitude. So whether it be wearing all the waste that he has used in a year in an outfit, or perhaps maybe even going off the grid and only eating produce that he has created from his own garden, or perhaps eating out of dumpsters. There are loads and loads of examples of things that he has done. Also living in a tiny little house. He's a fascinating guy. And I think if you enjoyed this, you will certainly enjoy that interview as well. So make sure you go to the SciFest Facebook page or perhaps their website and sign up for that. But on that note, Sue, we want to thank you so much. It really, really was inspiring. And to all of you that watched this live, and for those of you that threw in the questions and joined us as participants, we really do appreciate it. And that is us signing out from the SciFest webinar series. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone. Bye.